So when you think about innovation, when you think about change, there's one consistent story that rings true everywhere you look. No matter the industry, no matter where you are, there's one story that always comes up. And it's called the Buggy Whip story. Here's how it goes. In 1907, most of America was familiar with one form of transportation. Many people had them, or at least they knew about them, and it was called the buggy. Everybody who owned a buggy had wheels that went along with a buggy. They had a horse or two or three or four to pull the buggy, and of course they had a buggy whip to move the horse around. And this was kind of the status quo. This is how things happened. But then in 1908, there was a change in the game. In 1908, Henry Ford rolled off with the car, and you could say it was at least a game-changing innovation. It was felt mostly by the populace. The general population understood that things had changed, but so did the industry. So there were 1,300 buggy whip manufacturers all across the country. 1,300 cottage industries, larger warehouses, businesses built around the production, manufacture, and distribution of buggy whips. And so in 1908, when Henry Ford rolled off the line with his first car, 1,200 of those 1,300 took a look at the situation and said, you know what, this car thing, it's not going to last. It's too expensive, it runs on gas, it needs a garage. Who wants to have a garage? That's weird. It goes way too fast. Here's what we need to do. We need to protect our industry. Let's do what we do better. So in short, let's figure out how to build a better buggy whip. 1,200 of them said that, so they redoubled their efforts and they tried to build a better buggy whip. 100 of those 1,300 said something different though. 100 said, let's do what we do differently. They took a look at the situation and they said, this is going to change the world. Things will be different from this point out. We need to do what we do differently if we're going to survive. So what did those 100 do? Let's take a closer look. They made steering wheels, they made furnishings, back seats, car roofs, and shifters. They retooled their warehouses, their distribution apparatus. They hired new skilled workers to manufacture all of these things to put in cars, and then they turned around and sold those things to Henry Ford. So although Henry Ford was actually their first customer, he ensured the survival of those 100 businesses. And so what's really interesting is to take a closer look at those 1,200 and those 100. What were they really saying? The 1,200 that said, let's do the same thing, just better, what they were really saying is, we're here to make buggy whips. This is what we do. We make buggy whips. Come hell or high water, this is what we're familiar with, and we're sticking to it. The 100 that said, let's do what we do differently, actually we're saying, we're here to help people get around. Do you see the difference? One is product-oriented, the other is customer-oriented or people-oriented. Now that's an enduring lesson for thinking about change, for thinking about these momentous, disruptive changes in our culture. Now that's true whether you're a marketing type trying to sell your latest widget in your business, whether you're in the nonprofit trying to assess the larger culture and get volunteers to buy into what you're doing. But the funny thing about this is history actually repeats itself. So this happened at the turn of the century, but it's also more tragic in recent memory with the railroad business. And so there's a corollary. This thing actually happened twice in our culture. So for example, the railroads. Railroads asked a question a while ago. They said, where are we going? And many of them said, man, we just don't know. We don't know what the future of transportation looks like in our country. A while ago, people took railroads to get from point A to point B, to get across the country. It was the safest means of travel. But then, here comes the airplane. And just like Henry Ford's car, the airplane, especially with passenger travel, when that became a viable commodity and a viable option, people said, I'm not thinking about trains anymore. I'm thinking about a plane. That's how I'm going to get from point A to point B. What were they really saying? When the trains asked, where are we going, and said, we don't know, what they're saying is, we're here for trains. We're going to try and make trains better. So what do? They sunk money into larger berths and larger en-suites. They upped the ante of the food in the dining cars because they were designing this whole system to make the train experience better. The trouble is, it failed. When you get into when you have to think about how to go from New York to San Francisco or LA, probably 1 in 1,000 people even think that trains are even an option. Many of us consider cars, but most of us think about, if I'm going to cross the country, I'm going to get there in a plane. Why? Because what they're really saying is, we're here for people. There again, product-oriented versus people-oriented. It's a really fascinating thing, and it plays out over and over and over again. This is in a book called Marketing Myopia by Theodore Levitt. It's in the Harvard Business Review, and here's what Theodore Levitt has to say. The railroads did not stop growing because the need for passenger travel declined. That grew. And so let's stop there. That's actually a really fascinating thought. The railroads were declining at the time the population was growing. It shouldn't have happened, but here's what he said. The railroads are in trouble today because they assumed themselves to be in the railroad business rather than the transportation business. The reason they defined their industry incorrectly was that they were product-oriented instead of customer-oriented. That is a fascinating insight for anybody who's ever tried to lead in the midst of change. This book is a remarkable tool, and it's a really, really short one. So that is the story of the Buggy Whip. It's an enduring parable, it's an enduring metaphor. So here are the questions that I'd like to ask. First question, which question are you asking when it comes to discipleship? Are you trying to do discipleship better, or are you trying to do discipleship differently? Second question, if the game has changed, how does that impact your church? Are you trying to do what you've always done, just doing it better, or does your church have to do something differently? Third question, what does this mean for you personally? If the game has changed, what does this mean for you personally? See, I believe that God is calling us to go places that we've never gone, down paths that we didn't even know were there, using tools that haven't even been invented yet. The mission stays the same. We are about discipleship, but thanks to the Buggy Whip story, we know that we have to adapt and we have to change. So take a look at those questions and see what that looks like for you.